Part 2 Brave Knights and Strange Adventures. Chapter 1 Balin Seeks Arthur's Loyalty. It was good that King Arthur had Excalibur, since there still were many rivals plotting his downfall. But with Merlin to advise him and many brave knights willing to sacrifice their lives for him, Arthur was confident that he could defeat his opponents. Arthur had not been back at his court for long when news came of another challenge to his authority. King Rience of West Britain sent a message to Arthur with a strange demand. Rience said that he was making a cloak from the beards of the kings he had defeated. Now he required Arthur to contribute his beard to complete the cloak. This message infuriated Arthur. He sent a reply stating that King Rience would soon be begging for mercy instead of a beard. Of course, a ruler as haughty as Rience refused to back down. He raised an army and planned to attack everything in his path until he reached Arthur's court. Arthur called his knights together at Camelot to plan a counterattack. While the knights talked, a maiden came to the court seeking Arthur's assistance. The Lady of the Lake of Avalon sent a message to the king. The maiden said once she had the king's attention, she pulled aside her mantle and pointed to a sword and scabbard that hung from her girdle. "I am charged with bearing this sword until a true knight pulls it from the scabbard. Many knights have tried, but all have failed. None of King Rience's knights were able to relieve me of this burden. I will come to your aid," Arthur said. But he could not pull the sword from the scabbard. He asked that all worthy knights at his court come forth to try. Afraid that they would prove themselves to be unworthy, the knights stayed where they were. Arthur was ashamed of his knights. The maiden left the castle alone. In the garden, a man in ragged clothing approached her. This man was called Balin. He was a trustworthy knight, but he had been in prison for half a year for killing a cousin of a king during a joust. He had just been released and was eager to prove his worth to Arthur. "If you will allow it, I will try my hand at the sword." The maiden looked doubtful, but she drew aside her mantle. The knight defiantly drew the sword from the scabbard. Both he and the maiden were surprised at how easily it had come out. When they looked up, they saw that the king and the other knights were standing around, marveling that it was Balin who had been able to retrieve the sword. The maiden thanked Balin and asked for the sword. Balin refused to give it to her. She warned him that if he used the sword, it would cause his death and the death of one he loved more than any other. Still, Balin was intent on keeping the sword. He planned to ride out in search of adventures that would regain the king's esteem. Before Balin left, a fine lady arrived at the castle. It was the Lady of the Lake of Avalon. She had told Arthur how to acquire Excalibur. Now she had come to ask for the gift he promised to return for the sword. "I asked for the head of the knight who helped this maiden, or the maiden's head." Arthur shook his head. He could not murder Balin or the maiden. "He killed my brother," the lady said, "and caused my father's death. I am sorry that you have lost your father and brother, but I cannot do as you wish. Please ask for another gift." Balin saw that the knight was troubled by the king was troubled by the lady's request. Since he wanted to prove his royalty, he rushed forward and beheaded her. Arthur was shocked by this brutal act. He banished Balin from the court, so Balin left. He was determined to kill Arthur's arch enemy, King Rience, and show Arthur that he was a true knight.